Hey everyone, welcome to the 106th edition of DF Direct Weekly. This is, as always, our weekly show where we discuss the latest gaming and technology news. Big bunch of stories to get through this week. Joining me first of all, Oliver Mackenzie.
Hey Rich, how's it going?
Absolutely fantastic. And of course, John Linneman.
Hey guys, it's great to be here, and it's nice to be on another one with Oliver here. It's
Absolutely.
Likewise.
Good times, I think. Lots of stuff to talk about.
For those wondering, Alex is actually taking holiday, which,
Wow.
We can't have that, can we? Okay, let's move on to the first news topic. So this was a story posted by a guy called Tom Henderson on Insider Gaming. It's completely unverified at this time, but there have been various rumblings that this may have some meat to it. And it is the story of a potential handheld coming from Sony, which would attach to PlayStation 5 and allow for essentially, I guess, streaming of gameplay, remote play style. I don't think there's much of a suggestion that it's some kind of Steam Deck-like autonomous system. It's basically a second screen, which enable you to play PlayStation 5 games in a similar way, I guess, to the old Wii U controller. I'm going to go to you on this one, Oliver, first of all. Thoughts? Is it a good idea? And is it what we need for PlayStation at this time?
Well, in terms of whether it's a good idea or not, I think it's interesting because in the past, Sony has done these big dedicated devices like the PS Vita and the PSP. And I think that recent history has basically seen them sort of consolidate more efforts around their very successful home consoles. And I think in that sense, It's a good move because you launch an accessory like a PSVR style device or this PSQ style device or whatever it ends up being, and you don't take as many risks and you have immediate access to a big library. But I can't help but feel a little bit disappointed because I love Sony's portables. I mean, I have
Absolutely.
2 PS Vitas right here to show for it. And I think they do a tremendous job with premium hardware, and I can't help but feel like this isn't premium hardware. You know, it's a streaming device that is ultimately maybe not super interesting, although it depends on how they're actually going to be doing maybe local streaming. Maybe that'll be a bit more interesting, but it doesn't seem like a super exciting device.
I like the idea of basically being able to take your PS5 gaming away from the main screen. I think that's actually a really strong benefit to Nintendo Switch, is that you're not tethered to any particular room, any particular screen. And obviously the limitations of the device would be according to network traffic and network speed. John, I think you're going to side with Oliver on this one, that you really wanted a dedicated device, right?
Yeah, so this sort of device does have a very different sort of market potential than a PS Vita or a PSP. And there's pros and cons to it that I could see. This actually kind of reminds me of do you guys remember the Xperia Play phone?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, I had one. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it basically shares a design language with the PSP Go, or sort of slides out. But that was not a real PlayStation style platform, right? It was just sort of borrowing that legacy there. This Q Lite idea, though, I suspect this is born out of the realities that both Sony and Nintendo have faced over the years in regards to developing for multiple platforms, right? It's difficult to support 2 completely unique machines. And that's probably why Nintendo went for the whole Switch model in the first place. I can't imagine Sony wanting to return to this split hardware model, even though they're already kind of doing that with PSVR to some degree, right? Because it does require unique games. So I'm sure that they would like to have a portable unit, but don't want to support it with its own software. And that's where this makes sense. The problem is, there's 2 problems. For one, first of all, streaming over mobile is extremely limited these days. At least based on the experiences I've had, it doesn't work very well. It requires too much bandwidth. The video quality is poor. It's just not a great experience all around. But if you were to simply tether it to your system within the house, that could build upon current systems such as the remote play functionality. But I think, Rich, you actually just tested that again, and remote play is unfortunately rather poor.
Yeah, it is. I've never played remote play on PlayStation 5. I played it on PlayStation 4 for, I guess, I don't know,
We
a
did, yeah.
day. A
Something
day
for
just
that.
to test it, yeah. And essentially the video quality was poor and the latency was unacceptable. But a lot of people liked it, right? However, I did just play PlayStation 5 remote play for the first time ever in what I would consider ideal conditions, in that my PlayStation and my PC, which I was streaming to, were both wired connections, right? The latency was really subpar. Bearing in mind that I'm now used to stuff like GeForce Now, which is an actual proper cloud streaming system, this was palpably worse than that. And although I was using it in a small window on my 42-inch OLED, small window, I could still see compression artifacts. It would be lessened on an even smaller screen, but I don't see remote play as being capable of delivering a premium experience worth investing in a specific device for. As a value add to to a phone or to an existing, laptop or whatever, it does the job. And if you're not playing an action game, happy days, right? But you mostly are, I guess, and it's not great.
Does PlayStation 5 does support like Wi-Fi 6, I believe, or like a higher end standard?
Does it? I'm not sure. I guess we could quickly Google it. But what's the point?
Well, I guess my idea is that the current remote play setup is based on sort of an older standard that they set up for PlayStation 3, maybe even originally. I'm sure it's changed since then, but it's sort of an old setup where here, if they were to engineer a device specifically for PlayStation 5, they might be able to come up with a better means of connection, right? But that doesn't solve the away from home problem, where you might have to rely on cloud streaming. And cloud streaming, again, on the go, in theoretical terms, there are ways you can do this, even on things like an airline, right? Like, people talk about this, oh yeah, you can do the cloud, no problem. But in reality, in terms of the actual like use case for the average person in the most common scenario, it's not going to work that well. Like, connections just aren't that reliable in these places. And I feel like all of the different use cases one might have for this, like, oh, I'm going on a long flight, or I'm taking a train somewhere. Those are exactly the places where the signal is most compromised, and you're likely to have a poor experience. So,
You are right, though. It does have Wi-Fi 6. And in theory, it should be able to stream high bandwidth, data streams quite successfully. However, basically, I think most of the latency is actually built into the media block on the console itself. Basically the idea of taking the image and compressing it and then beaming it over, that whole process is actually done on chip. There may well be, faster alternatives. But certainly remote play, as it is right now, I don't think they could sell a device around it. I think it would have to be something separate, bespoke, and eminently superior to that. So, I wouldn't say it's completely off the table. But, I remember back in the day, do you remember the Wii U? Obviously, the Wii U had its direct streaming, and I think we all agreed that was actually rather good, right?
Quite good, yeah.
I have some props today, but I got my gamepad right here, and this thing is, this is awesome. Like, it's just super low latency, lower latency than most displays that people would have had hooked up to the Wii U. And the actual bitrate of this thing, it's not crazy high, but it works for its intended purpose. And if they could do some sort of direct device to device streaming system, because I think the Wii U's was based on the Wi-Fi technologies of that era. If they could do something similar, I think it would be a very, very compelling device for home use, which is probably a very large proportion of the scenarios in which people are using a Nintendo Switch, for instance. So to me, that seems like a compelling product. I don't have much interest in remote play given the latency involved, even on a home network. But if they could do a device-to-device streaming with very low latency, that would be a really interesting device to a lot of people, I think.
Mm-hmm. Do you think there's any hope at all that Sony would ever resurrect the dedicated handheld? And the reason I put that forward is that basically GCN compatibility, the architecture of PlayStation 4, backwards compatibility is baked into all existing AMD architectures because it has to be, because Sony and Microsoft are there key customers, right? So at some point, I do think that their mobile chips that they're producing will be able to do flawless PS4 backwards compatibility, and not emulation. Is that a device that could work? Let's say they can actually shrink the existing PlayStation 4 APU, and actually produce a device that would allow you to play all PS4 games on the go. Do you think that would be compelling, or is it basically?
Yeah, I think that could be compelling. Or I was considering, and this might be more challenging to pull off, but if Sony had an equivalent to the Series S, right, where it's like a downscaled version of their larger console into a dedicated handheld format, obviously that would not just mean that you could use current PlayStation 5 games natively without some sort of update or patch, but I like the idea of a little system like that. But as far as PS4 is a difficult one specifically because even though it is still a viable machine, I could see them not being fully on board with the branding side of things, where it's like, oh yeah, if you want to play PS4 games from 10 years ago, here's a handheld that we just released to do that, right? Like that feels counterintuitive to their messaging, which is why I feel like a shrunken down PS5, which again, that would not be an easy device to make, but it's not impossible either, I would say.
Yeah, I think it would be very difficult to make. That's for sure. I think the idea of basing it on the PS4 library, as cool as it sounds, inevitably means that at some point there's just not going to be any new games for it.
Yeah, exactly.
Unless this thing really takes off.
It's a little bit of a bizarre idea, the idea of extending out a 10-year-old console.
Yeah,
maybe with new software, but with a new device. I think technically it's becoming maybe in the realms of possible. But just as a product device, I don't really understand where Sony would do it.
It's a funny example, and I don't think it would happen here, but Sega did this twice, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like, the Game Gear is functionally very much a Master System. It actually has some improvements as well. And then there was the sadly not very successful Sega Nomad, which was a handheld version of the Sega Genesis / Mega Drive, which released at the tail end of its life, while the Saturn was already available. So, but I don't think modeling 90s Sega behavior is a wise move for Sony, to be honest, but it has happened.
I actually saw the Nomad years before it came out. Really? At Sega Europe. Yeah. It did take years to come out. That's the problem, right?
It didn't come out in Europe either. It was I think it was America exclusive.
But, if you could just imagine, we were sort of like, I guess towards the tail end of the Mega Drive era. I was in the offices of the marketing director of Sega Europe at the time, and he was talking about the 32X and the Saturn. So this would be like 93, 94, and likely 93. And then, he just got out this little black device from his drawer, and it was a portable Mega Drive. Can you imagine how mind-blowing that would have been? It was just absolutely astonishing. And, but yeah, it took so long to come out, and then it only came out. Did it come out in Japan?
I don't think so. I think it's America exclusive.
Yeah, man. That was just astonishing.
I have one.
Nobody believed me when I told them.
It's a neat machine, but it's super weird. And the battery pack requires AA batteries, and it's an external thing that affixes to the back of the unit, so it makes it even bulkier. It's not great. So,
Oliver, final thoughts on a PlayStation handheld?
I'd love to see Sony do a real one. But I think this device sounds interesting. And I think to me, it really comes down to, can they find a really good use case for it in the home? Because I don't have very much confidence in remote play working out well in the field, especially not on a home network. But if they can do something direct with device to device, I think that's a potentially very compelling product that I'd be interested in. And, the other specs sound reasonable, like an 8-inch screen, 1080p 60, all sounds fine. Maybe an LCD, hopefully an OLED, maybe probably not, given the status of the device as an accessory. But the rest of the stuff sounds good. I think it really just comes down to getting a low latency game feed onto that device.
Man, the description of an 8-inch LCD with DualSense-like controls on either side of it, that sounds like a very large unit.
Oh, yeah.
And, the thing that Sony does, well, I was going to say they used to have an obsession with aesthetics that was valued sort of the sleek form factor, but then they released the PS5. So I guess everything, anything could happen at this point. But
they also released the PS3 Super Slim.
That's true.
Which is like possibly the most ugly console I think I've seen.
It looks good in white though. It's actually a nice looking machine in the white color, I think. Not that bad. But it is very cheaply made. But yeah, this whole thing, I don't know.
Well, John, let's put it this way. Let's say it was like a Wii U controller in terms of response. Do you think it would work then? Do you think there would be a market for it?
Let's ask Nintendo. Do you think there's a use case for the Wii U?
Well, you could argue that the Switch is an evolution of the best things of the Wii U.
Yeah, but it's specifically the Switch solves the issue where the Wii U requires you to be tethered to the console, right? Which was one of its limitations.
Yeah.
So
it's all to prove, really, isn't it?
I don't really like the idea that much. I mean, I could see it potentially working, but I really hope they don't necessarily go down this route. I think that would not be the best move, especially in the land where we have the Steam Deck and competing handhelds
and Switch to imminent.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Let's move on to the next news topic. We're not done with handhelds. Sorry. Bizarrely, on April the 1st, Asus showcased a new device, a handheld portable PC similar to the Neo 2 and Steam Deck and whatnot. It's Windows 11 based. As is the case with Asus ROG products, there are some insane specifications here. A 1080p 120 hertz screen with VRR, which is pretty awesome, right? The Asus ROG Ally. Not quite sure when it's coming, but Linus Tech Tips has already done a kind of hands-on with it. And it seems to be using the new 4nm chips from AMD, which would be, I guess, the Phoenix Point line, which Oliver talked about recently. Wow. I mean, I think it's really fantastic. First of all, that the concept of a handheld PC is actually gaining traction. It's not just the Steam Deck. We seem to be getting a whole sort of range of competing devices, which I think is fantastic. The idea that Asus, with all of its engineering power, is bringing a device to market, fantastic. The fact it's using a state-of-the-art SoC. They're talking about 50% performance boost over Steam Deck at the same wattage, and 100% boost to performance at 35 watts, which, that's just going to drain your battery incredibly quickly, but I guess is for like docked play. Also, an eGPU output, so you can literally connect an RTX 4090 to it if you wanted to. Oliver, thoughts on this one? Because I know that you're quite invested in handheld PC play.
Yeah, so I think the performance aspect of it, to me, that's what immediately stood out, because people are quoting that 2x figure without also mentioning that it's 2 times the performance on a more modern device at 2.3 times the wattage on a device, pulling 35 watts on a device that's probably going to have a comparably sized battery to the Steam Deck, which has a 40 watt hour battery. And we all know how quick the Steam Deck can go at 15 watts. So at 35 watts, I imagine you'd be sub 1 hour in all likelihood on that device. Yes. So yeah, it's not twice as fast as the Steam Deck under reasonable use. It's 50% faster. If we take their quoted numbers at face value, that's much more realistic, and that's how people should think about it, at least as a portable device. It does have a 2-fan design, so the thermal solution looks beefier, appropriately so, and that part at least looks interesting to me. Like, I'm definitely glad that someone is taking the Steam Deck device concept and pushing it, even if it's with probably will be commodity components in terms of the Phoenix silicon, because I think that's showing up in a lot of devices. In terms of the physical form factor of it, I'm a little bit more mixed about it, because like, if you look at the Steam Deck, you have these big grips on the back, right? Mm-hmm. And it's really nice, and you get like these big buttons and big grips, and it feels really nice in the hand. And this doesn't seem to have that as much. It's much more like a little curve on the back side. I actually like the stick layout quite a bit, maybe more than the Steam Deck, just because it's a more conventional stick layout and the thumbsticks are oriented towards the sides of the device, which maybe makes it more comfortable. On the display side, it sounds like an LCD based on what they're quoting for the pixel response times, which they quoted 7 milliseconds, which you wouldn't quote that if it was an OLED. And 1080p 120 is ridiculous, I think, but you know, 1080p 60, who knows? I think it might be in the ballpark with that, with like last gen games maybe, but just some thoughts.
VRR is certainly a value.
Oh, huge,
That's
yeah.
key.
Yeah.
Linus also rated it at 500 nits in terms of brightness measurements,
super bright,
which is ridiculous, honestly.
Yeah, the Iron EO2 devices do 400, and that looks really, really vivid and fantastic. Yeah, so this, it's really interesting to see that Valve basically aimed to get a device to market, with a certain price point in mind. But, everybody else is basically taking those specs and running with them, producing better things, but also I suspect there'll be an inflated price point to boot on that. I guess, I'm just trying to think of things that, I don't know. The main bugbear I have with these devices is Windows.
So that's what I was going to talk about here, and I feel like this is not the correct choice for a handheld like this, and this sort of fundamentally misunderstands why the Steam Deck works as well as it does. Is that Steam OS, with all of its custom driver work and everything that Valve has done on that side, it allows it to actually function more like a proper console. And you're also given a lot of additional flexibility in terms of how you configure your games. What I think I would like to be seen here, and there's nothing to stop these manufacturers from using Steam OS, right? Like, I think they absolutely could.
Well, yeah. I mean, it would require assistance from Valve. I mean, there's nothing stopping you putting a Linux distribution, a customized Linux on there.
But what my point is that I'm actually, maybe they simply haven't gone to Valve for this, but I'm surprised Valve hasn't made more of a push in this regard. Even though, yes, they sell their own hardware, but I think it would behoove them to work with these other OEMs to create devices that are built to run SteamOS properly and support all of the features of the Steam Deck, because for Valve, it's not just about selling Steam Decks, it's also about pushing SteamOS and their Linux dream, right?
Well, and yeah, the entire concept is about getting more people into the Steam ecosystem, buying more games on Steam.
But shipping Windows on one of these devices, I just don't think Windows in its current form anyway is a great experience for a portable unit. It sort of kills that plug and play design that you would hope for. It means it does not really function like an actual console might, right? And actually, I'm not sure about this, Rich. I actually forget, but is it possible to do like proper sleep modes within Windows? Like where you just like tap the button, the game goes off, and then you tap it again and you're back into it instantly.
Yeah, this sort of thing is reasonably well done because it kind of has to be.
I mean, it kind of works like that on laptops, right?
But yeah. The main issue is that Windows 11 simply isn't designed as a kind of sleek operating system for low power devices. So if you're going to put standard Windows 11 on a mobile device, all of those background processes that are there on your desktop PC are also there on the on the handheld, and it's not ideal, right? There's also been issues with the way clocks and power limits are handled on Windows, because in a desktop environment and even on a laptop, it's not getting optimal clocks isn't really a ultimate priority, but it is for a handheld device. So that has been problematic as well. What I find with the ANEO devices, I mean, I've looked at the Air, I've looked at the ANEO 2. Like for like with Steam Deck, it just seems that running at the same power levels, you get lower battery life overall. That's a problem, right? And it's going to be the same for this unless Asus have really done some hard work on stripping out the bits of Windows that aren't actually needed for gaming. I'm really interested in this device, but I just think that Valve are actually tailoring this as a mainstream endeavor, right? They realize they've got to have a front end that works. They realize they've got to optimize for very limited battery life. They also have a whole bunch of OS level tools aimed at optimizing the experience specific for a low power handheld that these other devices don't really have. They also have control over the operating system in a way that these Windows devices don't have. So, there's a lot that Steam Deck has in terms of advantages, even though it's running games through a compatibility layer. But the hardware on this really does look, I mean,
that's
first class.
Also, part of it is the cost, right? Valve can afford to eat some of the cost of the Steam Deck components because they are selling a storefront, right?
Yeah.
They're basically following the console model there, and maybe that's actually why they don't want to,
There's something else.
But yeah.
Yeah, I get it. There's something else I noticed as well in the Linus video is that, off-screen play, you could see stuttering.
Yes.
And that's another thing that Valve are taking really seriously, like pre-compiled shaders on Steam Decks. And, at launch, they had a better experience for Elden Ring than many desktop users because, they basically looked at what the issues with the code were and then adjusted Proton to compensate for it.
You won't get that here, I'm sure. There will not be pre-compiled shaders for the ROG Ally. So
yeah. So there's a lot of challenges facing all of these Windows devices, and there's a lot of things that Valve are doing right. But at the same time, there's, I do think that there are issues with Steam Deck running newer titles, and this is something I think we're going to be taking another look at, right, Oliver?
Yeah, that's the plan.
You're going to be following up your Too Big for Steam Deck video.
Too Big for Steam Deck Part 2. Too big this time.
Way too big for Steam Deck.
Way too big. Just quickly, what games are you thinking of looking at on that one?
Oh, let's see. RE4, Hogwarts Legacy, Returnal, a number of titles, Dead Space. Yeah, probably 6 or 7 in there.
Wow.
So, are they too big?
Some of them will be. That's my spoiler. Yeah, I think this device, it's interesting, but still my number one concern or kind of wish list item, and I think John would agree with this, I would love to see an OLED on one of these devices.
Yeah, of course.
I think it sort of sucks that you get these IPS LCDs with pretty mediocre contrast for playing AAA stuff, which doesn't really work. Like I was trying Resident Evil 4 on my Steam Deck the other day, and it regardless of how well it might run or might not run, I guess you'll have to see. But the contrast levels and the brightness levels aren't really that well suited to modern game graphics, I feel like, and this device doesn't really seem to be pushing that far. Maybe the panel quality will be better, but it's still going to probably be an IPS LCD.
Yeah.
I mean, fundamentally, that's the reason why, especially with smaller indie games, if you pick up a Switch OLED model versus a Steam Deck, the Switch OLED can wind up feeling more advanced and just better. Simply due to the screen quality, even if the actual technical performance is worse. So
yeah, the screen quality
playing games like Metroid Prime Remastered, for instance, I think Oliver and I both played a lot of it.
Yeah,
it looks so good on that screen, and you just can't match that on a Steam Deck, unfortunately.
Okay, well, hopefully we'll get a look at the ROG Ally sooner rather than later. I do really want to see it, and I'm kind of interested to see what the new AMD APUs can do. Something which we haven't seen in the coverage yet is literally game performance.
Right.
I'm guessing there are embargo restrictions on from AMD there. They don't want details of what their new processors can do out in the open right now. But yeah, we'll have a report on that as soon as we can. But I guess for now we'll move on to the next news topic. John, yesterday I think was another example where you were almost flipping the table in rage. You weren't happy, were you? Let's be frank. No. The story here is that essentially Xbox Series console support for emulation has basically been turned off overnight. RetroArch doesn't work on Xbox Series retail consoles anymore. You have to go through the dev mode route. And you're not happy, are you, John?
Well, no, obviously not. This was a functionality that I've really enjoyed using, especially lately. RetroArch is an amazing piece of software for use on a console. Basically, what this offers is it allowed people to use their retail system to install these emulators on there, and it functions perfectly with a controller. It's very streamlined. It's much less trouble than configuring a small PC to work on your television. And it was great for things like, one of my favorites, of course, was DuckStation on there. Or it had a different name under RetroArch, I guess. It was but you could enjoy PlayStation 1 games with all those improvements, the PGXP stuff where it solves the texture warping issues, much higher color depth, smooth gradients everywhere, just improved performance. It was a fantastic way for specific types of systems. It also supported, Dreamcast stuff, which Dreamcast itself, no big deal, but it did allow for like Atomus Wave and various other arcade board derived from the Dreamcast to work very well on the Xbox. Of course, there was Final Burn Neo on there for some great arcade action. And even one of the coolest things, even though I do prefer to use an actual vintage PC, there was the DOSBox Pure, I think it was called, where you could just drop DOS games onto your Xbox, and they were basically pre-configured with controller support due to how that is set up. And you could just start playing DOS games on there. It was unbelievable. And all of this was backed, with RetroArch's absolutely killer CRT shader support, all these other features, everything was there. It was just a beautiful machine to configure. And I actually used this a lot on my Xbox. And it is still accessible through development mode. But unfortunately, as far as I understand, you do lose some performance in that mode, especially on Series S. We need to double check that though, to be sure. And it also, you basically have to pay for development mode on one account, and you have to reboot in and out of that mode, specifically making it less seamless than if you were just using it in retail mode. So those are just some of the use cases, but yeah, they essentially just killed support for it just like that. And I'm curious to know if so I actually had my Xbox in off mode. I don't use the power save or whatever, the low power consumption mode, which allows it to remain in sleep. I had it fully off. I pulled the network plug before turning the system back on. It was not connected via Wi-Fi. And even then, somehow, I guess something snuck through and it was not able to run any of these emulators. And that's also a problem with things like Homebrew, I guess. So basically they're disabling all this additional functionality of the Xbox, which, fair, it wasn't actually an advertised feature, right? But everybody knew about this. And I know for a fact that at least 2 people that I know personally picked up an Xbox just for this support. And now it's just gone like that. And even though it may not have been officially promised, it leaves this bad taste in your mouth. And I really hope that they can find a way to restore it at some point. I assume there was an email going around. It's difficult to verify whether it's actually accurate, but suggesting that perhaps Nintendo had a hand in this, but which wouldn't surprise me at all. They are notoriously anti-emulation. Well, at least as far as products that they're not selling. But installing emulators on your device is not illegal, right? That's the thing. If people put illegal content on their Xbox, that's their own problem. But being able to install the emulator, that should not be forbidden by Microsoft. And it's really a shame that they're able to simply disable these now installed applications remotely. It's like, oh, you have it on your Xbox. Now we just snap our fingers and now you don't. That really, that bothers me a lot that that's actually possible. And, yeah, I mean, I don't know, you guys, I know Oliver, you've at least used this feature as well, right?
Yeah, I got RetroArch running.
It's great, right?
It's fantastic. It was like really well put together. All the cores worked really well. I don't know. I'm really uncomfortable with the idea that, you have software installed on your machine and then Microsoft just remotely disables it. And also on the basis of like relatively spurious legal concerns. So just in terms of running emulators, that seems to be a pretty well-trodden
exactly
use. So it just makes me uncomfortable because you think you own something and you think you have control over it. Maybe this ties in with some of John's other thinking where, this device is connected to the internet. It can be disabled at any time. Your licenses can be revoked according to certain terms. And it's unfortunate because these worked extremely well. And yeah, it was a fantastic experience.
I don't really know what to add to that. I mean, I haven't used the feature, but I can see how it would have extreme value. And also when you look at, something that I've been talking about for a long time now is just how much value you get from the Xbox Series S. It's a device that's cheap to buy new. It's a device that allows, people who aren't, massively wealthy to get into the current generation of games in a way that you can't do on PC, in a way that you can't do on PlayStation because the console's $500. The other thing I love about the Series S is that for whatever reason, it's incredibly cheap on the used market. So,
yeah, you're right.
I regularly see Series S on Facebook Marketplace for about £100. And when you consider the amount of technology you're getting for that £100 as a used product, and the fact that it is basically the way it was designed, it's essentially bulletproof. So I don't really have too many concerns about buying a used Series S. It's bringing gaming into a really wide audience there. And I really love the concept behind the Series S, which is, Microsoft foresaw that consoles are getting more expensive and, they need to do something about it. And then to have on top of that, basically access to all of these games, from prior generations and delivered in such a really impressive manner. It's obviously extremely sad that has just been snuffed out at a stroke. And, I guess we have to chase for some comment from Microsoft and to see whether they'll actually want to talk about it. But it's just a real shame, right? And also, I think one of the reasons why the Xbox platform hasn't been hacked is because of the open access that they provide via the UWP. And, obviously UWP hasn't been greatly maintained moving into the current generation, but it does work. And the idea that actually now Microsoft is going to be more stringent in how open the system is actually quite unfortunate.
And Rich, the other thing that springs to mind here is whether or not they have this sort of control on a Windows PC as well, right? What's stopping them from disabling applications they don't like in the future?
I think that would be really difficult for them to enforce.
I absolutely. I think so too. But at least on the UWP side, they probably could do it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because that is their, the content is delivered via the store, right? And the store is their domain. Yeah.
So I don't know. That's just, it's a real bummer. I'm really sad that they decided to take this approach, and I can only hope that they somehow find a way to reverse it.
Absolutely. I mean, I guess there was a lot of talk yesterday on Twitter about how it was kind of inevitable.
But
it's still, sad.
It's more like I could understand it if they disabled people from installing new copies of these emulators, but it's more I take issue with their ability to deactivate already installed software on the console. That's my big problem with it right there. I don't feel they should be able to do that.
Absolutely. I guess that's all we've really got to say about that at the moment. Bit sad, but
it is.
Let's move on.
This generation is just, it's so interesting. I was doing an exercise here thinking about can you guys list the number of Xbox Series S/X games that are actually next gen only, games crafted just for those machines that appear nowhere else?
How
many are there?
You mean on other consoles rather than
the
Hi-Fi
PC
Rush.
So there's Hi-Fi Rush. We get that one.
Yeah, Flight Simulator.
Yep.
There is a bunch of them, right? But I think your point is there's not many.
Are there others than those two?
The Medium?
No, that's on PS5.
Oh, so you're talking about pure Xbox next generation exclusives. Yeah, they are thin on the ground. I think that's fair to say.
I don't know. Between that and and this applies to all the consoles. I just feel like this generation, we're already we're going to be 3 years in this year, and it feels to me like the generation has not started yet. And I understand the COVID situation and game development is taking longer than ever, but it just feels like the generation actually hasn't really started. It feels like we're stuck in the first year of the console, basically.
I get what you're saying, because if you go back to 2013 and the launch of Xbox One and PlayStation 4, they launched with, more than 2 exclusive games in their launch windows.
The Xbox One was much maligned by many people. It was not a popular machine initially. Microsoft had to fight to win back that mindshare. But if you look at the first couple of years of Xbox One, there were actually a lot of first-party games from Microsoft for that thing, right? It was very well supported out of the gate, much more so than we're seeing this time. And it's also the same with PS4. Where, there was just a ton of stuff coming out for those machines. And there was still a cross-gen period there, but it felt like it was really well supported. And again, I understand development has changed a lot, but you go back even further, look at like PlayStation 2, right? And the amount of stuff that launched in 2001, like its first year, it had some decent stuff, but 2001, it was packed with so many games. It saw the beginning of so many new franchises. It was just absolutely amazing. And that's also the year that Xbox and GameCube hit. Like, there was just this constant stream of new, amazing things that we'd never seen before, brand new IP, amazing sequels, everything. And then you look at like this generation and it's just, it feels so flat and empty in a way that's extremely discouraging to me. And
well, this is a completely different topic, but I'm on board to discuss it, right? I think there's a lot of factors to
yeah,
to
no, I know. It's just
there. And
I was thinking
about
this only because of the emulation stuff, right? Because I was talking with somebody about it, and we all kind of realized like this emulation stuff was one of the things that we've used the console the most for, right? It's like, well, why is that? That doesn't make much sense. And not just the unofficial emulation, but also the backwards compatible stuff, the official emulation from Microsoft. I've also used that more often in general than any new software. And it's just weird that we're in that position, I think.
Well, I think we're in that position for two reasons. First of all, as you've pointed out many times, the cost of making a game and the time it takes to make a game now is far, far longer than it was, for the launch of PlayStation 2 or whatever. And secondly, the weird thing about this generation is that it's the first time where all of the platform holders are using what you might call next generation versions of their existing architectures, which has opened the door to cross-gen in a way that simply wasn't possible with PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, right? So that's why we are where we are, right? And I actually think at this point, bearing in mind how difficult it was for them to make PlayStation 5 and Series X, the task of actually producing a mid-generation refresh or indeed an actual entire new console generation means that I think we're kind of now stuck in a perpetual cross-gen situation.
It's basically the phone model at this point.
The phone model, but not an upgrade every couple of years.
Right.
Be
less often, with a lower frequency, but a similar
4
concept.
years, let's say.
Yeah.
That's where I think we're at, and I think that is going to actually just change the whole shape of the way games are made, and also the kind of vaulting ambition that we saw with the launch of new consoles is going to be more muted. I think at some point it's not so far now where we are going to be at the 10-year anniversary of like Killzone Shadowfall, and there wasn't really.
This year, right?
Yeah, it'll be later this year. We're already past the 10-year anniversary of its reveal, which was February 2013.
I feel like that's a game I've been wanting to revisit on the channel because
absolutely,
there's a lot of amazing
retro
stuff there. It's basically it's retro
10 years.
And it's full 60 FPS finally if you play it on PS5. So
absolutely, yeah.
That and I also feel like Rise deserves another mention because Killzone and Rise were the two showpieces back in 2013 for their respective consoles, and they hold up really well today.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
quite surprising.
Yeah, but that's the way I think about this current generation is that, you're right, it hasn't really begun yet because we still haven't fully jettisoned the last generation machines yet. But, we'll get there. I mean, if you think about what's happening in the last sort of year, and if it had happened, a couple of years earlier, stuff like Plague Tale Requiem, for example, really does push visuals. If that had been a launch game, would have been entirely doable.
Thinking about launch stuff is what, like, I feel like the biggest misstep here ever, like in the history of it's Halo Infinite. Like, Halo Infinite was supposed to be a launch game for Xbox. If that had come out Series X and S exclusive and they had actually managed to pull it all off, I feel like they would have had a ton of strength getting off the starting line there. Like, that's what we needed, is like a really high quality Halo game at launch, just like that original Xbox. Obviously, we know that would not have been possible in retrospect, but man, if that had been pulled off, what a difference.
But I would like to say just one quick thing, which is we've seen not just Plague Tale, but also Dead Space, I thought, at least after the patching effort. That was like a very good looking and capable current gen only game that
it is very nice looking, but I wouldn't say it looks better than, say, the Callisto Protocol overall.
Oh no.
And And Callisto is cross-gen. Although those cross-gen versions, they have their own problems, but still.
Just in terms of like an accomplished current gen only title that at least shows some maturity with the hardware, I think maybe that shows it. But also I think games that are coming up this year, like Final Fantasy 16, Forza Motorsport, Spider-Man 2, like I think this is really going to be the year that we see cross-gen jettisoned, not just in terms of games not being released on last-gen consoles, of which most big titles this year are not getting released on last-gen consoles, but in terms of games that really do push the current-gen hardware in the way that we probably expected we would see a lot earlier. But
yeah, I feel like the two examples that still stick out for me are Ratchet and the Demon's Souls remake.
Yeah, completely.
Just looking well beyond what you would have seen on last-gen machines, and then it just sort of faded away after that. Like, we've not seen anything quite as impressive as that, I feel.
Ratchet looks awesome.
Ratchet's unbelievable. Yeah, it's so good looking.
Well, it was cross-gen, but Horizon, of course.
Yeah, Horizon is very impressive.
And we should be seeing the PS5 only DLC within weeks.
I would say both Horizons, if you know what I mean. Forza Horizon and Horizon Forbidden West. Those are beautiful games.
Okay, well, that took a bit of a left turn, didn't it?
Yeah, it's just, yeah.
It's been on your mind, John, I know.
It has been. And this just kind of pushed me over the edge. Like, what are we even doing here, guys? Come on.
We're playing games.
I want this stuff better.
Okay, well, that's it. That's the end of the news for this week. Let's move on to supporter Q&A. This is the area of the show where, as usual, we select a bunch of questions put forward by our supporters on our Patreon. So, yeah, if you want to get involved, patreon.com/Digital Foundry. Join us. Get involved. There's amazing stuff happening on our supporter program, including Q&A. And we're going to start with this question from Manny Mao. Do you think generative AI, GPT style bots could have a role to play in gaming, such as RPG characters that never run out of dialogue? What about generative image AI? Could it somehow play a role in game visuals, either in real time or during development? So, Oliver, you're on top of AI in a way.
He's our AI man.
Yeah, nobody else on the team is. You're fully generative. What do you think of this?
Yeah, I think completely. We've already seen, there was an old experimental game from 2006 called Facade. It was like this Flash game where you typed in things to a character. It was very primitive. So the idea of typing in custom responses and getting responses back, that's been a thing for a long time. And there was AI Dungeon, which was originally based on GPT-2, and then updated to GPT-3, which was basically just a kind of like a MUD, a text dungeon game that you just type things in and it types things back, and it was totally free form. So there are examples of this already, and I covered this in my video, but yeah, I think it could be brought much further. I think the hard part of it would be integrating it with game mechanics, because like if you have a character who says like, oh, I'm going to hurt you because you said something mean to me, you know, you need to have that tie into the game and actually getting that interface with that AI language model, even if the language model is very complex. That's maybe harder. In terms of image AI, there are a lot of potential uses for creating game art, obviously, and not just concept art, like lots of texture art and things like this. Again, I go over this in pretty excruciating detail in my video. But to me, the most interesting stuff that I'm kind of thinking about now is using AI for user-generated content in a game. So like if you're playing a game and you're making a game avatar, maybe you type in a prompt instead of using sliders or something. You get a really interesting looking result, a really cool looking result. And then maybe that's your game character and they make different poses and different expressions out of that base art. That'd be really interesting. And in particular, it's interesting because Stable Diffusion models are free and open source, and you can download them. So if you include the Stable Diffusion model with your game, which is about 4 to 7 gigabytes, depending on the model, you can run that all offline on a graphics card that your user might have, or a console GPU that your user might have. So it's all very feasible, I think, even within current timelines and without an internet connection or paying money to a service. So I think
isn't it the case that there's actually a lot of energy consumed in processing these prompts, which may not be a good fit for a console?
Well, it wouldn't be the kind of thing that you would render out in it wouldn't be like you ask for it and it pops up a second later. It would be like a 20-second lag, 10-second lag, 40-second lag. Like there would be a period when it was processing, right? But once the image is generated, obviously there's no continuing energy use.
I'm thinking more of the concept of talking to an NPC in a game.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah,
GPT
so
style.
It would depend if you're running it on the device locally. It would need to be one of the smaller models to run efficiently and well, especially in the context of a 3D game. But it really depends, because for the most part, people who have made games using these language models are just using the OpenAI GPT API. So they're just querying to high-end server hardware, basically, and getting those responses back. There are ways to run large language models locally, but those are more primitive. But I mean, I'm sure it could happen.
I think that actually could suffice, though, and would be preferable to relying entirely on servers. But
yeah,
mainly for incidental dialogue, right? Not for main important conversations. But I do think it would add a lot of flavor if you just had additional sort of dialogue options from random NPCs walking around the world that actually sort of vary up what you hear.
Yeah.
But not in a way that would actually impact the gameplay. It could be restricted, right? To prevent things from saying like, oh, the AI is now mad at you and now you have to engage in combat, right? Like that could be restricted, I'd assume.
Yeah. Like you give it instruction to respond to the player in a conversational way that it avoids topics that might lead to in-game actions. And then you'd also maybe pair that with a speech synthesis. So you type in your queries, the NPC spits out a response, and it's actually a voice dialogue. Like all this stuff is theoretically possible now. It just depends on people to chain together various implementations.
We've already seen a lot of people pushing into the old school text adventure game model using GPT and the like, and that actually seems to work pretty well. But I'm thinking more, do you remember the old Sierra graphic adventure games where you would actually have to type in, they had like a parser and you would type in your desired action into there and, you know, get sort of a response. But it was always frustrating because it was heavily limited in terms of what you could actually do. This would be a pretty neat use for that. And I would like to see some like classic Sierra style adventures revived using sort of a GPT model.
It would be, for it to properly work, it would need to be you physically talking to them within a game, right? The concept of typing wouldn't work on a console for starters.
No. Absolutely not. But
I don't know, I just find the idea of having extended conversations with an NPC a bit of a blind alley, because it's, it's basically slowing down the game. And I mean, I have tried the Bing AI, and I don't know, it seems to be aggressive.
So, like, imagine you're playing, like, The Witcher 3, and you're going through the world, and there's a ton of NPCs, and they all have the option to interact with them, but unless they're key to the story, you simply tap a button and they play a pre-recorded line. It would be interesting if they could attach sort of like some sort of indicator to like the clothing you're wearing or whatever options or weapons you're holding, and like feed that into the model in the background. And then as you pass AI, they might, for instance, comment on what you're wearing or what you're doing, and like basically find ways to sort of tie the player into the world through this incidental dialogue that's not part of the story, but it would sort of flesh out the world and make it more believable that you're there, rather than them just going like, or what do you want? Stuff like that, which is currently what they do.
I think the potential for these kinds of technologies is very large and untapped, and I'm sure people will come up with all kinds of crazy things. Because once you have like this very capable language model, you can really start to, I think, go nuts with a lot of stuff. And like you said, it would be really cool to see like custom game reactions according to your character, according to placement.
Exactly.
Feeding all these things, that'd be awesome.
Okay, fair enough. Let's move on to the next question. This one from Stephen Hall. Would upgrading from 16 gigs to 32 gigabytes of system RAM help at all with VRAM bottlenecks on a GPU having 8 gigabytes of RAM? Simple question, simple answer, no.
Nope.
The issue here is basically you've got two separate pools of memory, right? And what happens when the GPU memory is full is that it actually starts to shuttle data back and forth with your system memory. And so it's not really how much system memory you have that dictates, what actually happens here. It's the speed of the transfer between those two pools. And ideally, they shouldn't really be shuttling back and forth at all. System memory should be feeding the GPU, but it shouldn't be being used as a kind of low latency pool of extra memory. I do think that there is probably a way, and I think Marvel's Spider-Man might be doing it, where the system memory is used for kind of like low priority art, but that, again, that wouldn't really wouldn't really change by having 32 gigs instead of 16 gigs. But man, this whole VRAM issue, it is tricky at the moment, right? Because we are actually seeing, we are moving away from games that were designed for 8 GB consoles, and we are seeing on suboptimal releases that 8 gigs is proving problematic. I think more challenging is the fact that if you want to have, we've got like a GPU like the 3070, for example, which is really quite capable, but it doesn't have enough VRAM for ray tracing.
It's held back, yeah.
So it's, if you're using high-end ray tracing features and you don't have enough system memory, that's problematic. And I'm seeing the rumors that 4060 and 4060 Ti will be 8 gig cards, and I'm pleading with Nvidia not to do that, because it would just be disastrous.
Terrible idea.
Well, I'm going to say that ideally a 4060 level product should be giving you a console style experience. That's pretty much what the 3060 does. I mean, its raster falls a bit short of what a PlayStation 5 can do, but you factor in DLSS, you factor in the extra ray tracing power, and that's actually quite a decent GPU, I think. And it's got 12 gigs of RAM, so that it's bypassing this entire controversy in a way that the far more capable 3060 Ti and the 3070 are not. So there's two ways. I mean, there's two ways to look at it. First of all, I don't think that 60 class products and above should have 8 gigs of VRAM if they're releasing now. But I also think that per Alex's comments last week, it has been established at this point that there are ways to ensure that an 8 GB GPU can give you a console-like experience, and it does require engineering effort from the developers, right?
Yeah.
So I guess that's that.
It's funny, this question sort of reminded me back, one of my first 3D graphics cards in the 90s, it shipped with my PC. It was a Matrox Mystique 2 MB, and back then the way VRAM management worked, like if you loaded up a game, like I remember with this occurring with Tomb Raider 2, it really wanted 4 megs of VRAM rather than 2, but you could still play it. But if you increased your resolution too much, rather than erroring out or running slower, it would simply just not draw textures. So like when it ran out of VRAM, the textures would stop drawing, so you would just see flat white shaded polygons.
Wow.
It's really funny to think about that actually could occur, but that's the way it kind of was back then.
So just to be clear, this would have been years before you invested in your Evil Commando GPU.
Oh yeah, I mean this would have been like 96 or something like that, if I recall. But yeah, a long time before the Evil Commando, which the Evil Commando was a great graphics card. That was the Radeon 9700 series, which was excellent.
Yeah. But it wasn't at all evil.
And it was not evil. That's right.
This is what we need for the next generation of GPUs. We need more VRAM, and we need absurd names. I guess we had the Speedster Merc for the 6800.
True, but we're also missing graphics card art. They would like cover the shroud and this like wondrous artwork. And you're like, okay, this is fantastic. You just put like Ruby on there on the AMD side, or like a giant like machine gun, or like a dude with sunglasses just right on your graphics card, just looking at you.
The dream combination of that artwork and RGB lighting, it scarcely bears thinking about. Right?
Man, it's a market waiting to be tapped once again.
Oliver, you've just bought a 4090, right?
Yes, 24 gigs, I think, on that, right?
Yeah, so you're not really worried about VRAM issues right now. Which model did you get in the end?
I got an
Does it have flashy lighting?
Well, it has lighting, but I turn it off usually. It's the MSI Trio, Gaming X Trio, I think.
Oh, okay.
Which is like has the ignominious distinction of being the only launch model without a vapor chamber, I think. But it was cheaper. But it's perfectly fine.
Does the job.
Yeah,
I mean, the coolers in those things are gigantic. I mean, it's unreal.
big, right?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Crazy stuff. Let's move on to the next question. This one from the Phantom Naught. With multiple in-game character revealed trailers for Tekken 8 being shown off, have you folks noticed any Unreal Engine 5 specific features, or is the Tekken project team playing safe with not going all out in order to maintain 60 frames per second? So, John, you and I looked at the recent footage that's come out for Tekken 8. It is Unreal Engine 5, but to answer the question, no. that's the case.
It is not utilizing Lumen or Nanite. It seems to me more like, Unreal Engine 5 is really, it's a continuation of Unreal Engine 4, but with a lot of new features in place and improvements made. I assume that they're just working within the Unreal Engine 5 environment, but given when this game likely started development and, the maturation of those specific techniques, I can see why they may have opted to stick with the more traditional options. Like we've seen Fortnite with Lumen and Nanite running at 60 FPS on these machines, right? But I think for Epic to get to that point, it would have been far too late for Namco to integrate that into Tekken 8, given where they are at with development right now. I think it's pretty obvious that frame rate was their number one priority. It's a fighting game, so it can't drop frames, or at least it shouldn't drop frames. I think it's a nice looking game, but it's not a game that's going to push any technical boundaries, which is a shame because that used to be something that fighting games could offer. You would get just like cutting edge visuals because you're just rendering two people and a background rather than a large world. And it was always used as a showcase, and we're just not really seeing that anymore. And that's a shame.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Any thoughts on this one, Oliver?
Yeah, I'm just looking at some footage now. I think that Tekken has a very stylized art style, or at least Tekken 8 does. And the lighting to me does not look like it will be an obviously necessarily a great fit, at least in the gameplay.
Right.
For something like Lumen, and also the fast movement to the characters would probably induce, like if you did have ray traced lighting systems, it might look fairly artifact ridden. I think maybe for some categories of titles, there will be aspects of the Wii 5 feature set that aren't necessarily appropriate. And I think when you look at Tekken 8, it looks perfectly good. It doesn't look fantastic. Clearly, they're not using a lot of these features, but maybe that's not such a bad thing.
I think the point is that the early trailers did actually look absolutely fantastic.
Well, those were more cinematic, weren't they?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Mm-hmm. Which made, kind of hinted that maybe there was like some sort of, awesome technical showcase heading our way, but actually it's just looking like a really good looking game based on current, rendering concepts. I think the other thing, something you mentioned there, Oliver, is when you look at some of the RT techniques that are in play, they're based on the concept of accumulation.
Yeah.
And when you look at how fast a fighting game is, it's probably not a good fit for that in the here and now, certainly, as it were.
Bring back that Tekken 6 style motion blur, and then we'll talk. That's the...
Bring back Virtua Fighter 3's undulating terrain.
Oh yeah, that was an awesome idea. We haven't really seen that since. Yeah, they were one of the developers to really pioneer using IK for foot placement, and it was absolutely stunning at the time.
Absolutely, yeah. Let's move on to the next question. This one from Blim, and he's getting straight to it. Look, I'm being blunt. When can we get an affordable graphics card that holds 60 FPS with ray tracing consistently? This is an interesting question because the Steam hardware survey was updated this week, and at the number one spot now, with around 10% of market share, is the RTX 3060, which I would argue possibly hits that target with using DLSS with a performance mode, or I guess balanced in 1440p. I guess it's possible to do that. Certainly you can do it with Marvel's Spider-Man. And affordability, I guess the concept that it's the number one GPU on Steam suggests that it's affordable. But at the same time, we've got a lot of games that are pushing ray tracing even harder now. It all depends really on a number of things, right? What is your resolution target? Do you want to run everything ultra? I mean, it's just kind of like a shifting target.
Yeah,
really.
there is no like singular answer to this question, I think, right? Because all ray tracing is not created equally. as well, right? There's no card
Yes.
you can say, yeah, across the board, this will just do ray tracing, like, slam the side of this bad boy can handle all the ray tracing you throw at it. But no, that's not a case. Especially, if you want to play these path traced games right now,
Yes.
you're certainly going to have a bad time on any card that's not very high end and expensive.
Yeah, I mean the MSRP. Obviously, a lot of the 3060s would have been sold way above MSRP, but the $330. It seems to actually have worked as a price point in theory. If it's actually hitting the number one spot at this point. The prices do seem to have calmed down on the 30 series cards. So
I think part of the problem with a question like this is basically that over time, it seems like even over the course of this generation, because we have advanced ray tracing, because we have path tracing potentially in certain games that might be upcoming, this is very much a moving target, and the bar will always be getting raised according to what the very fastest graphics cards can handle. So I don't think you're ever going to get to a point where you can say this card definitively will last me for X number of years or for the entire generation, because people will always be pushing up the bar with ray tracing.
I actually think what we're really waiting for is the first big Unreal Engine 5 games to ship with Lumen and Nanite and hardware support, because there are a lot of games in development using this engine, right? They're not here yet. And I think once they land and we see how they perform across a wide range of hardware, we'll have a better idea of where people should be aiming in terms of GPU purchases.
Yeah, I've got to admit, I really kind of want to see how the RT Overdrive version of Cyberpunk works on an RTX 3060. That's going to be quite interesting.
Yeah.
If it works at all. Let's move on to the next question. This one from Joachim Ahern. Thank you guys for all the hard work. How do you guys feel about the rather sparse implementation of ray tracing in games that promised RT, but didn't have at launch, such as Halo Infinite, A Plague Tale Requiem, Elden Ring, and so on? Should developers even bother adding them in a patch if they do nothing but destroy performance with little visual improvement? Atomic Heart should be getting it soon, right? This is a knotty one, isn't it? I think, the concept of Elden Ring introducing ray tracing a year on from release is kind of like, well, we've talked about this one at length, right? It's the wrong priority for that game. Halo Infinite, the deployment of ray tracing is very limited. Doesn't really add anything substantial to the game. The question is, should it have, I can think of better things that maybe the Halo team should have been doing instead of that.
I think patching in ray tracing support post-release is only valuable if it adds significantly to the visuals, like we're seeing with the Cyberpunk Overdrive stuff, right? That is valuable because it's pushing technology to a new level. That's interesting, and people will want to revisit the game for that. But if it's just like ray traced shadows a year on, it feels like a waste of engineering time.
Thoughts, Oliver?
Well, yeah, I mean, I generally agree. If it takes a substantial amount of effort to implement this stuff, especially in games that already have pretty pronounced technical issues like Elden Ring, it does seem like a bit of a waste of time. It depends, I guess, on the game. Like some games, like I kind of like the implementation of ray traced shadows in Halo Infinite, but it is extremely limited because it's only on PC, at least for now. It'll be on Xbox at some point, I believe they said, and it's only in multiplayer. And it's just kind of like, why do you spend? If this did take a significant amount of engineering effort, there are definitely things about Halo Infinite's visuals that I'd like to see improved that maybe don't involve ray tracing.
Or if they're going to implement ray tracing, there are many other rasterized faults in the visuals that could use correction.
Yeah,
specifically their lighting system, which is pretty bad.
Yeah, I mean, Joaquin here is talking about Atomic Heart. This is a really interesting one because. John, we were actually at the 2018 launch of Turing, the GPU architecture that brought ray tracing, and Atomic Heart was actually one of the demos we saw.
That's right.
And it seemed to be doing some crazy stuff like full Hall of Mirrors type reflections. And I'm just wondering whether, this kind of stuff just wasn't really workable.
I wonder, I can't recall the development history of this game, but was this always intended to release on consoles? So I swear in my head, it feels like it was like going to be a high-end PC showcase exclusively at some point. Maybe that's not true, but that might just be colored by the fact that it was always demonstrated alongside with PC graphics cards. But I don't know, maybe something shifted at some point. They're like, oh, we actually need to get this game done, and we got to release it on consoles.
It did look highly impressive, but it also looked highly taxing on resources. So I'm wondering whether it was something that couldn't be deployed to users. But yeah, this is the other thing which kind of frustrates me, is that, you know, you get marketing hype for these RT features that don't appear, and then suddenly it's complete radio silence from the developer. You know, at the very least, tell us what's going on, right? It doesn't seem right. Let's move on to the final question, and as usual, or has been for the last couple of weeks, it's not a question. This one from Roll, not a question, but this is one of the best banners of all time. I legit thought it was 3 times Vich for a second, which would be completely meaningless to the audience, but basically every time I put out a call to questions on for the next DF Direct Weekly, I put together a fake thumbnail of showing you team members, and this week it's me, Dr. Evil, and Blofeld. But yeah, it's just a bit of fun, you know, the stuff that we do on the supporter program, just, you know, extra lulls, but that's kind of it, really. But the concept that he thought it was me in 3 different perspectives does make me chuckle.
You can pull off the villain look.
But that's it. That's the end of the show for this week. Please do like, subscribe, share. If you did enjoy it, ring the bell for those. I'm back to saying notionally instant notifications, because I'm no longer getting instant notifications from that channel that I really don't like, that one of you guys actually subscribed me to. So back to notionally instant notifications. And yeah, of course, the DF supporter program, as always, join us. A lot of bonus material, early access, and a lot of great stuff going on there. But that's all from us for this week. See you next week.